Okay, guys, so let's do a quick recap on covalent bonds. So you should have done some reading in the textbook and taken some notes and gone through this PowerPoint at least to a certain extent. So one of the prior slides, and we saw this slide yesterday, said that covalent bonds share electrons. Okay, again, we just want to make sure that we understand that they're wanting these electrons because they want that noble gas configuration. So they want those 8 valence electrons, okay? And remember, these covalent bonds are going to form molecules. And that's different from ionic compounds because ionic bonds formed compounds. Okay, so let's look. So again, if you look here, the one image shows a covalent bond and these two atoms come together and share electrons, whereas the other shows an ionic bond where it's that giving and taking that are creating these ions. Now remember, ions are charged particles, charged atoms. Your positive ion is your cation and your negative ion is your anion, and it's those opposites that attract. So just a quick little recap. When we name covalent bonds, naming covalent bonds is actually really easy, okay? You have prefixes, and you have to know your prefixes, okay? So there's a chart. Please write it down. Write it a couple of times because it is going to be really important that we know our prefixes. I always tell my students, think about when you're thinking about these covalent bonds, think about CO2. Now, we know C is carbon, right? And O is oxygen. So these are 2 nonmetals. So since these are 2 nonmetals, these are going to be in a covalent bond. Well, what do we call CO2? We call it carbon dioxide. Okay, so we want to remember, we've already done this. This oxide is your oxygen, right? Well, look over here. How many oxygen do we have? We have 2. Well, the prefix for 2 is di, which is where we get dioxide. Get it? So 2 oxygens. Now, notice we only have 1 carbon, okay? So we are not putting a prefix here. And that's one thing that will be noted here is that we do have a prefix for 1 being mono, but we're only going to use mono on the second element, okay? So we're only going to use, only use mono on the second atom. Okay, so let me give you an example. So we said CO2 was carbon dioxide, right? And we've all heard of carbon dioxide. Okay, what about CO? Now, I'm not talking big C, little o. I'm not talking cobalt. I mean big C, big O. Okay, this is carbon, right? And how many carbons? We just have 1. So it's just going to be carbon. And then O, again, is going to be oxide. So notice, guys, even on these, we're still changing the ending of the last element. So, but how many oxides do we have? And if you look down here, it's monoxide. Well, guess what? This is going to be carbon monoxide. And we've maybe all heard of carbon monoxide. It's what cars give off. That's could be deadly. It's you usually have carbon monoxide detectors in your home if you have natural gas. So carbon monoxide. Now notice, guys, this is not monocarbon monoxide. It's just carbon monoxide. So we're only using this mono on the second atom. We're not using it on the first. So let's look at a couple of different practice problems. Went too far. Okay, so if we look here, we have, there we go. Oh gosh, I went too far. Go back. We have 2 elements here. So our first thing is we want to make sure we know what type of bond this is going to be. We've got carbon here, which is a nonmetal, and we have chlorine, which is a nonmetal. So since it's 2 nonmetals, we know it's covalent. Okay, and if it is covalent, then we know that we are going to use prefixes. Okay, so let's look here. The first element we have is carbon, so it's simply going to be carbon. Now, how many carbons do we have? We just have 1. But remember, guys, like we said a second ago, you don't use mono on the first element. So you only use mono on the second. Now, the next substance we have is chlorine. But how many chlorine do we have? We have 4. Now, if we look back at our chart real quick, 4 is tetra. Okay, so it's going to be carbon, tetra, chloride. Okay, so let's break this apart real quick. So tetra means 4, and we have 4 what? Chlorines. Now remember, guys, notice it's not chlorine, still just like the ionic, and now it is still chloride. All right, let's try a couple more. Okay, what about this, SO3? So S is sulfur. Now, guys, when in doubt, please just check your periodic table. Oftentimes, people write the wrong element. Like here, you could easily write sodium, and we know that that's not it, but sometimes we do make careless mistakes. Now, it's just 1 sulfur, so we're not going to put anything here. Okay, now my oxygen, I have 3 oxygen. Okay, do you remember what the prefix for 3 was? Kind of like a triangle or a tripod. It's going to be tri. And since it's oxygen, it's no longer going to be oxygen. It's going to be oxide. So let's just break this down one more time. Tri, because there's 3 of them. Oxide is because it's oxygen. Remember, when we're doing this, we're going to drop the ending, and we're adding in its place I-D-E. Okay? So let's try another one. Sorry, went way too fast. Here we go. All right, so now this one's a little different. Do you notice it's not 1 of the first element anymore? This is actually 2. So what do we have 2 of? We have 2 nitrogen. So what's the prefix for 2? And look back at your chart if you need to. The prefix for 2 is di. So it's going to be dinitrogen. Okay, let's pause here for a second because I want to point out a couple of things. Notice the di is because there is 2. I need you to understand that we did not change the ending of this substance. Nitrogen is not the second element in my compound. We only changed the second element's ending. So just be really careful, okay? Now, if we look at this next one, we have oxygen. But how many oxygen do we have? Now, notice there is no number written, but we know when there is no number written that there's 1. Now, notice this is the second element. And kind of like in carbon monoxide, we do put mono for this one. So it's going to be dinitrogen, mono for the 1, and oxide. So monoxide. So notice the mono is because there is just 1 oxygen. Okay? Now, when you generally write this, if you would have monoxide. Okay, but we wouldn't duplicate the letters. Now, to be completely honest, I would not count off if you added those double O's because you've got the idea of it. But you'll realize it's not monoxide, it's monoxide. And again, that will be something that comes naturally as you practice more and more. Okay, so what about, we already talked about carbon monoxide, so CO. So I always tell students, guys, if you get a little mixed up with this, think about CO2. Okay, you know this is carbon dioxide. Okay, so you know with this one, you are using prefixes. Well, figure out what type of elements these are. So this is a nonmetal and a nonmetal. So that means when you use 2 nonmetals, you use prefixes. Did we put prefixes on the first element? No. If you think about CO, that's carbon monoxide. Well, do you put prefixes on the second element, even if it's that 1? Yes. Okay, so just a really great reference to kind of think about. All right, now the easy part of this is writing the formula. So here we have carbon tetrachloride. Okay, so we have 2 elements, carbon, and can you see the second element in the word? Sometimes it helps to block off the prefix. So my prefix is going to be tetra, and so my other element is going to be chloride. So I'm going to have carbon and chlorine. Well, how many carbon do we have? There is no prefix, so that means there's 1. And tetra is the prefix for 4. Now, guys, I need you to make sure you realize it's tetrachloride. So the 4 is going to go with the chlorine, okay? I know it's before the word and it's going to go after the letters, but just think about what it's connected to. Okay, if we look at this next one, we have nitrogen trifluoride. So we're going to look at nitrogen and fluorine, right? Well, how many fluorine do we have? What's our prefix is tri, and tri is the prefix for 3. Now, is it 3 nitrogen or 3 fluorine? It just says nitrogen, but it says trifluoride. So that fluoride is going to have 3, so NF3. Okay, if we looked at sulfur tetraoxide, so tetra is my prefix, and we know tetra is a prefix for 4. Sometimes that's kind of a tough prefix for us to remember, so just heads up on that. But the elements we're working with sulfur and oxygen. Well, how many sulfur do we have? We just have 1. There is no prefix. How many oxygen are we working with? 3. So my answer is SO3. All right, so this last one. This one looks super duper confusing because there's a whole lot of stuff going on, okay? But it's really not that bad. Okay, so we have diphosphorus pentaoxide. Could you hear the elements within? The elements I heard were phosphorus and oxide. Diphosphorus pentaoxide. Well, my prefix, let's go ahead and block those off. We have di and penta. So di is the prefix for, do you remember what number? 2, and penta is the prefix for 5. So let's look back at it. How many phosphorus do we have? It was diphosphorus, so we have 2 phosphorus. And then we have pentaoxide, so how many oxygens do we have? 5. So it's P2O5. That's all it is. Okay, guys? So I just want you to take a few minutes. You are assigned to do the covalent molecules worksheet today. The top part, you're writing the formula. The bottom part, you're writing the name. Okay? So this should, don't forget your endings. Look back at these examples if you need it, and just shoot me an email if you have any questions. Okay? Thanks, guys.